is two things really. One is it's the idea of creating a resilient future, and that whole idea of what does that mean in terms of the broader world. How does it mean in terms of sustainability? What does it mean in terms of the larger things we're trying to achieve in the world? And that can be a whole bevy of things for different people. But you know, if you can understand this idea of a resilient future for all, as it sort of plays itself out in the broader world. But more so, and I guess what we focus on more from a resilient futures perspective in terms of the framework, is what does the framework mean to me? How can I use the Resilient Futures framework as a tool in my business, my community, my organisation, for thinking differently about strategy? And implicit in that, by actually that small operation taking place inside my organisational community, I can then start to expand that application. A lot of people are doing that. There's this idea of a resilient future. So it's both a very, very micro movement in terms of your organisation, your business, with all the things you're trying to get out of business or your organisational community. At the same time, it provides the possibility of something bigger in terms of a resilient world or a resilient future. If you were to look at the world in terms of the things that are going on, we would, I don't think anyone would dispute that it's always been complex, but we're having to deal with all those complex issues more so these days. And this is a complex world, and it begs the question, given its complexity, where do we start? I mean, as a for instance for that, you know, we have issues of extreme weather events, climate change that's talked about. We have issues, particularly in our home country of Australia, with water and food production. Our recent situation that's occurred in the Murray-Darling Basin really brings that home. These aren't just global issues, they're very local issues. We have population, what do we do with all these 7 billion plus people? We have issues of CO2 emissions and the carbon issue. We have oil prices, and we have a changing geopolitical world with China. Now, each of these we can talk about. We can take these all the way back to a global level, but specifically we can take them to a local level. And what we would assert that whilst this is a complex world, we shouldn't be hiding from that. What we need to be doing is understanding that we are relatively facing very complex issues and problems, but we're complex process poor. So what the Resilient Futures framework does is it provides a way of looking at complexity and dealing with those complex issues, and really asking the question at a very local level: how can I create opportunity ahead of complex change? So very importantly, getting a sense of what is that complex change about, how can I embrace complexity, and also then looking at it in terms of how can I create opportunity out of that rather than seeing it as a crisis. Well, what we talk about in Resilient Futures in terms of the framework are 3 things that we focus on. One is the principles, the second is the process, and the third is the practices. And really, we start off very, very quickly with the idea of the principles. I'll talk just to one initially, and that is to look at things in terms of the whole systems perspective. We really live in this complex world. It's basically a large, complex system that we're in, and we really have to start to view it in that particular way. That we're not really dealing with me just here or my organisation here, but dealing with it as part of a bigger system. So we take that whole systems view and we start to embrace that complexity. If you think about that, that means that even though I might have a community or a business in one part of a place, that really I'm linked into a whole lot of other parts of places. It's not just about the business side of things, it's about the community side of things. It's not just about the people, it's about the ecology as well. And I know these sound at times very, very soft issues, but really what we're talking about, the whole place view provides you with a range of opportunities particularly if we start to learn how to embrace complexity. So, if you like, you've opened the lens up to talk about a whole systems view. Now you talk about how do I embrace that complexity. Now that's not a problem to do that. Part of the Resilient Futures framework helps you do that. And if a lot of people run away from the thinking of dealing with complex issues. But just think about it. We talk about that it takes 5,000 people to make a sandwich. Now that's a bit of fun to someone. But just think about making a sandwich. And I even make a sandwich for myself. It's taken 5,000 other hands to get to that point where I can make that sandwich. If you think about the simple transaction of taking an ATM card, putting it in an ATM machine and getting some money out, it's taken thousands of people to make that actually happen. We don't recognise that. The opportunity that's being created there by the banks, by embracing complexity, is huge. So the idea of embracing complexity inside a whole systems way of thinking is very, very beneficial. So that's just two principles. When we get into the process side of things, we talk about this idea of 4 processes which actually represent what we call an algorithm, just metaphorically speaking as an algorithm. Basically, we talk about corralling an opportunity or corralling a particular issue. Understanding conditions, understanding capabilities and developing capabilities, and also then taking catalytic action. I'm not going to talk a lot about this now, but those 4 particular processes are really at the heart of what Resilient Futures Framework is about. And just a quick whip through as to what that actually means. If you think of corralling, you've got all this complexity, you've got a whole systems view. You want to really understand what is the system you're working with, whether it be a place or a business, and think of it as a system. It's got different departments, it's got different places and different streets or whatever that might be that make it a system. And we need to understand that systems level. When we corral that, we actually get sense of what that actually means. And we actually understand inside that what do we want to do with that system in terms of what sort of value would we like to add. Then the next question is, what are the conditions that impact that system? Now, what's going on in the world? We've talked about carbon trading happening, we've talked about water and food. All these local things are impacting us, but it also may be the fact that our streets aren't working properly, our business isn't working properly this way or that way. So what are the background conditions that impact in that we've actually corralled, that issue, that business, whatever that might be? The next question is what we're going to ask ourselves, given that that's the corralling, that's what we're dealing with, and that's what we want to add. And these are the conditions. What capabilities do we need to work with inside that particular system? So we're actually starting to understand that whole capabilities, the role of capabilities in terms of those conditions inside that corral. Once we really understand those questions, we can really start to make sense of what's going on. And the real key principle here is that to create value, your capabilities must be in sync with your conditions. Now, if I were to actually just put it very quickly, if you think about it in terms of a football team has corralled a certain game. This is the game we're playing. This is what value we're going to add by playing that game. This is what we're doing on the day as such in that sense. What are the conditions they're going to be at play leading up to the game, the immediate conditions that are emerging? That's what's going to be happening around the day. It might be a week away from the game. Then the coach and the players have to work out what capability they're going to bring to bear on the game in that day. So there you can see they've started to align conditions, capabilities with what they're trying to do in terms of corral. Then it comes down to, I've thought that through, what is I'm going to do, how do I do it, is we talk about catalytic actions. And really what we're talking about with catalytic action is an action that's going to take place to stimulate that happening and building that capability inside those conditions. So we talk about that as a strategy in action. And that particular process, as I say, is an algorithm that we put inside people's heads in their communities and their businesses. Then constantly working that through at whatever scale, they can start to understand what's going on and start to deal with that complexity from a whole system